The Compliance Perspectives podcast is sponsored by Case IQ, a global provider of whistleblowing case management and compliance solutions. Learn more at caseiq.com. Welcome to the Compliance Perspectives podcast. I'm Adam Turteltaub from the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics in Healthcare Compliance Association. Joining us today from Lausanne, Switzerland is Professor of Business Ethics Guido Palazzo and Professor of Decision Theory Ulrich Hoffrage, both at the University of Lausanne, and they are the co-authors of the book, The Dark Pattern, The Hidden Dynamics of Corporate Scandals. First, Guido, let me start with you. Let's talk about The Emperor's New Clothes. You think it's a good lesson for business. In fact, you think it's a great lesson for business. Can you tell us how so?
Well, this is a book, The Dark Pattern is a book on corporate scandals. And the perspective we take is to argue that most of the time when people analyze corporate scandals, they look for the one or two or three bad people in the story, the bad apples, to explain everything. Our book takes a different perspective. What we argue is that most of the time when things go wrong in organizations, when people break moral and legal rules, it's not that they're bad people. It's basically most of the time good people and many good people being involved. So when we wrote this book, we decided to use the Emperor's New Clothes fairy tale as an illustration that explains how two crooks enter a kingdom and convince everyone that they are able to produce invisible clothes that are only visible to those who are very competent in their jobs. So if you cannot see it, you're stupid and incompetent. And the fairy tale shows how this story spreads and how people start to believe and mutually reconfirm it. For us, it's as if a social psychologist had written this story, right? And very often when we use it for teaching and for training, people tell us, well, that story reminds me of my company. You have a lot of the elements in that fairy tale that you also find in corporate scandals. Take, for instance, the one point that we highlight, which is the climate of fear that triggers absolute obedience. Then you have social effects like when people are confronted with an opinion that everyone shares and they somehow doubt it, the first thing they do is they start to doubt themselves. So if everyone agrees, they must be the problem. So you have many of these little psychological insights that you can take from this story. And it shows one thing that we want to bring across with the book. Most of the time, when things go wrong in an organization, it's good people who are caught in a bad context, in a high pressure context, in a very strong context that breaks them, that makes them do things they otherwise wouldn't do.
I think most everyone in business can relate to being in a situation where there's a long-held and well-held opinion across the organization that you differ from and find yourself doubting whether or not you're the one who's wrong about all of this. Now, you identify, Ulrich, 9 building blocks of the dark pattern. Can you take us through them briefly?
Yes, with pleasure. So the first building block is ideology. So there's now nothing wrong with ideologies. We all have ideologies, need them. That's a shared belief system that allows us to navigate this complex and uncertain world. But we call that first building block rigid ideology because all these building blocks can go wrong. And if ideology is too rigid, then unethical things may happen. So what is the main ideology we have today in business? And this is neoliberalism and maximization of shareholder value. And the price for being overly focused on that ideology is that ethics may disappear from people's radar screen. The second building block is toxic leadership. So ideology, maximizing shareholder value, for instance, does not come per se, but it's people who bring this to the company, who lead from the top of the organization, the employees there, and they enact it. They set goals, they incentivize it. And of course, these are sometimes bad apples. So there are narcissists, Machiavellian, psychopath, but we still would say that's not a book about bad apples, and we do not study their personalities, but we see them as context. And they are the context for the others. So it trickles down from the top. People copy them. People follow them. They set the rules. And they talk. And that leads to the next building block, manipulative language. So we do not just perceive the world as it is, and language is not innocent. Language can be used to frame how people see the world, how others see the world, and this is why we talk about manipulative language. And here we distinguish three types. One is aggressive language. So when the CEO talks about other competitors as the enemies, we are in a war, you can guess that unethical behavior or decisions is very likely. Another one is euphemistic language. So you do not talk about doping, but you say, yeah, this is an injection good for your health, or that will prepare you for tomorrow. And the last is cultish language. And if you are on a mission or part of a revolution, then in a way, rules don't count. So many revolutions, there is blood on the street, but you do not see the blood on the street right before you and that you create. But you see the bright future in the future. Yeah, you see the bright future and focus on that. So the next is number 4, corrupting goals. So a bit like ideology, goals focus. They focus our attention, and often in the business world, they focus on profits, on cutting costs. One of our chapters, Boeing, is titled The Price of Cutting Costs. So you see what goals can do. They can lead us to make compromises, and in the case of Boeing, safety suffered. So, and then we have also goals that are not just tough, but that are unrealistic. And that means people cannot achieve them. And this may lead them to cut corners. The next is destructive incentives. And this is basically how you enforce goals, how you sanction non-achievers. That's the carrot and stick. So here we have tunnel vision. If you focus too much on one goal, another goal, and that includes trying to be a good person, right? To do the ethically right thing, may disappear from the radar screen. Another one is the ranking and yanking we see in many companies. So you promote the best, fire the worst on some normal distribution, but that leads to a Darwinistic struggle for survival, kind of Hunger Games in organizations. Number 6 is ambiguous rules, and they create a gray zone. So for instance, you tell, as a boss, you tell to your people, bring me that contract tomorrow, and send them to a company, to a country where you know they have to bribe, otherwise they wouldn't get it because this country is corruptive. But you do not say bribe. You do not say, you just say, bring me that contract, no matter what. But on the website of your company, you do not have corruption as a value. So there you have all nice things. Be ethical, and corruption is, of course, not there. But what do you do then when you are sent to that country? This is a situation we call double bind. So here some ambiguity is created. Is it okay? Is it not okay? And this ambiguous rules may lead to unethical behavior then. Number 7 is perceived unfairness. So unfairness, if you feel treated unfairly, you want to try to rebalance thing in your own favor. And these attacks can come from the outside. So for instance, our chapter on Volkswagen is entitled Cheating in the Name of Fairness. So Volkswagen perceived to be excluded from the American market. So they were in a competition with Toyota. They wanted to beat Toyota. They wanted to be the number one, talking about goals, corrupting goals. And in order to get there, they needed to penetrate the American markets. And in America, in the US, it was perfectly okay to have these big diesel trucks. They were allowed. But we, Volkswagen, with our small, clean cars, were not allowed to enter that market, and that's unfair. So that results in this title, Cheating in the Name of Fairness. Number 8 is dangerous groups. So people put together in a group that basically reinforces what we already discussed so far as in the other building blocks. And here we see phenomena like conformity. So people copy each other, including the bad behavior, the unethical behavior. We see the bystander effect. So people observe bullying or other unethical practices, but they stay silent and they copy each other and stay silent. So we often do not have any speak up culture in companies. We see diffusion of responsibility, and we see groupthink, so where group members reinforce each other in their worldviews and beliefs. And finally, all that doesn't come from one day or the other. So sexual harassment, for instance, typically starts with a joke. So you have these small compromises, small transgressions, but they build up one day after the other. It smells bad at the beginning, but at the end it stops smelling. So these are the 9 building blocks. They all lead people to turn ethically blind and to not seeing that ethics disappeared from their radar screen.
What strikes me is all those things tend to be crystal clear afterwards, but at the time they get missed. Why is it that we don't tend to see them as they occur?
I think it's not completely right to say we don't see them. Of course, we do see them. We hear the language. We see the goals. We know what the goals are. We know the incentives. It's rather that they lead to unethical behavior, and we do not see the effect of these building blocks. So maybe a metaphor can help here. So people have their moral compass, and let's take a real compass, and it shows north. And it typically tells you where you should go when you want to go north, or what's the correct and ethical thing to do. But when you're standing next to a tank, so 40 tons of iron, the compass still points you in some direction, and you still know that you are next to a tank. But if you do not know what iron does to your compass, so like if you do not know what context does to your moral compass, you follow the compass, but the compass is distorted. It's not that you do not see the tank, but you do not see the influence of the tank. That's leading ultimately to ethical blindness.
So, Guido, how is it that compliance teams can help encourage people to speak up, to act, to not let these building blocks pile one on top of the other?
I think that the biggest challenge that compliance teams face is that they're very often too overly focused on the legal dimension of their job. They do not engage too much with the ethical dimension, and they do not engage probably at all with the psychological dimension of wrongdoing. Interestingly, and Ulrich mentioned that one of the building blocks is the slippery slope. So this idea that bad things never happen from one day to the other, but they creep into the organization slowly. Just to give you an example, in a company that had a huge corruption scandal, and I worked with that company after they had this scandal, they told me that the instigator of the corruption scheme was smoking in the office, but smoking was not allowed. So you see these little warning signals that people break rules, small rules, harmless rules, because they think it's their right to break those rules, because these rules don't count for them. Or think about the fact that very often big illegal schemes are developing in parallel to something else, which is sexual harassment. It's very often the same people who engage in one and the other wrong behavior. And what it shows is that there's a lot going on in organizations long before a scandal breaks out, long before a law is broken. And if you only look at the legal aspect of compliance, you cannot see it coming because the human risk does not start with the legal compliance. It starts with a little moral compromise and moves on from there. So what I think compliance teams need to do, they need to make their understanding of their role larger as they used to do, and to develop skills in social psychology, to develop programs in ethics Because just when you have a culture in which discussions on dilemma situations, discussions on wrong behavior, on problems, on challenges that have a moral dimension, where these things are normalized, your risk of becoming blind for it, as Ulrich described it right now, is much smaller, because you are used to reflect on it. But in most companies, to talk about ethics is considered a sign of weakness. Leaders think when they talk about a dilemma, they're considered weak leaders. And we, the business school professors, have to do some soul searching here as well, because we are spreading this theory of neoliberal management that tells them that ethics is for their private life and not for their job. So, all in all, compliance needs to rebuild from scratch, in my view, in most cases, and to become something much bigger than legal compliance.
Finally, when things do go horribly wrong, what's the best way to move forward?
So there is a chapter in our book that we call the bright pattern, and that is pretty much a list of things that would counter the dark pattern. So for each dark pattern, we offer some ideas about how to reduce the risk of that dark pattern building block becoming too influential. That's one thing. So, and that includes things as the speaking up culture that you have to build up. It includes things like the incentives that you can set, that you have to be careful not to pitch people against each other, to do what many companies right now keep doing. So that is what we find in all these scandals. Ulrich mentioned that the ranking and yanking that Jack Welch invented. So this firing of people as low performers, even if there might not be low performers, but there's the rule of 20% have to go. So if you want to avoid that things go wrong, or if you want to avoid that things go wrong again, you need to be watching out for these elements of the dark pattern that might have been strong in your organization before it happened. And the other element of the answer would be that once things have gone wrong, a company has a unique opportunity. A unique opportunity to do, as I said, some soul searching. But what we normally observe, I would say in almost all the cases that I have seen personally, when companies start to clean up, is business as usual. So you fire a few top leaders, then you hire some new people from outside. These new people are under the pressure to bring business back on track, so they don't want to look back, and they haven't been there when it happened, and it's pleasant to look back, so they move forward. But what you have in an organization that went through a scandal, think about Boeing with all these dead people in these airplanes. Think about Wells Fargo with thousands of people who committed fraud inside the organization. What you have is an emotionally very complex situation. You have perpetrators, you have victims, you have people who were just standing as bystanders and watching and feel guilty now. So you have a mix of feelings of guilt, of shame that you have to deal with. You have to create the safe space where people can exchange their suffering, where they can talk about what happened, where moral healing can start. Um, you can also think about training new people that come into the organization with the lessons learned from the past. But again, this is not what I see happening. This is, I've never seen a company doing that, because it is so unpleasant and you want to look forward. You want to go back to business. That's one thing. The second thing that I would advise companies to do after the fall, so when things have gone wrong, is related to what I mentioned before. You have to set up compliance in a very different way. You have to set it up as a human risk management system that goes beyond legal compliance and that includes also a skill set in compliance to analyze and observe what's going on in the company along the 9 dark pattern building blocks. So to see it coming early on, to develop a risk map. Um, and finally, also, of course, to go broader into ethics and to make it normal that people in the organization on all levels talk about ethical dilemmas and engage their teams in talking about values and ethics in an authentic way.
Well, professors, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today and in your book, The Dark Pattern, The Hidden Dynamics of Corporate Scandals. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen. I'm Adam Turtletaub from SCCE and HCCA. I hope we're able to expand your compliance perspective.